Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. 10-minute history. The Weimar I can't even say it. The Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany. I know I'm going to get slaughtered in the comments for not being able to say that, but I'm sure he'll correct me. Leave me alone, man. Fuck you. How about that? This is sort of a follow-up to the one we done the other day. So if you haven't watched that, go check that out. But yeah, anything with Nazi Germany is always interesting to learn. Let's get straight into it.
1918, the First World War is finally over. As punishment for losing, Germany's two wartime allies, the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, were carved up shortly afterwards. The pressures of defeat plunged Germany into chaos, and as a result, the Kaiser abdicated. Revolution and counter-revolution were the order of the day, and in the small town of Weimar, Berlin was too dangerous.
Weimar? What did I say? Weimar. What a mong.
The Weimar Republic was declared. The next year, the Allies signed the Treaty of Versailles, which dictated the terms of Allied victory. This territory was lost, and the Rhineland was occupied by the Allies. Germany further had to reduce its military massively, pay war reparations, and also had to accept almost full responsibility for the war's outbreak. So this new Weimar Republic is one of the most democratic nations in the world at that point. Suffrage was granted to everyone over the age of 20, including women. The German people could vote on two aspects of the national government. Every 7 years they voted on a president who presided over the German parliament, the Reichstag. Every 4 years people would vote for political parties in national elections for the Reichstag via a system known as proportional representation, whereby the percentage of votes nationally dictated the percentage of seats in the Reichstag.
Weimar Republic proportional. 30% of the national vote was 30% of the seats in parliament. Okay.
The president could call elections whenever he felt and also had the important job of appointing the chancellor who ran the government and could propose laws. These laws had to be passed by a majority vote in the Reichstag, and since no party ever got 50% of the seats, that meant that parties would have to cooperate. No, democracy did not guarantee harmony, and there was numerous attempts at revolution, such as the quickly aborted Socialist Republic of Bavaria and the 1920 revolution led by Dr. Wolfgang Kapp. Kapp seized Berlin, and the German army refused to attack him because there was a strong belief that Germany had only lost the war due to political betrayal. Kapp's revolution was only ended by a general strike.
That was that took up a big proportion of why Hitler felt betrayed at the end of World War One. From his point of view, and a lot of the German soldiers, they was actually winning. Some of them thought they was within 40 miles of Paris, and that morale was pretty high. In some areas of the war. So when he woke up, I think Hitler had been injured and sent to a military hospital at the time, and that's when Germany surrendered. Not because Hitler got sent to a hospital, but that's around the same time that Germany surrendered. And there was a lot of confusion in the German army at the time as to why this was happening. Obviously, the general soldiers aren't aware of the bigger picture. But so he felt very frustrated and betrayed after that.
Strike, which ground the country to a halt. This turmoil did not help the German economy, and eventually Germany missed a war payment. The French wished to punish the Germans for this, whereas the British wanted leniency. The French government decided that if the Germans would not pay them, then they'd simply take the money instead, and in 1923 the French occupied the heavily industrialised region of the Ruhr. The reason for this was that German reparations could be paid in raw materials, many of which were produced there. Another way that German reparations could be paid was in foreign currencies, which were paid for by printing more paper marks. This created the hyperinflation that the Weimar Republic is famous for. For example, in January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 163 marks, and in early November in 1923, the same loaf of bread cost over 75 billion marks.
Jesus.
In November 1923, another attempted revolution occurred in Munich, led by a certain Adolf Hitler and undertaken by the
Oh shit. They put a swastika in it? Yeah, shout out to History Matters, because, they wouldn't have got paid for this video. If you put a swastika in. I'm not sure if you get demonetised for putting Nazi in the title, but I know you get demonetised if there's a swastika in there, so they really just done this out of the kindness of the heart. Unless they didn't know it and then released a video and got demonetised. But a lot of people just stick with the Iron Cross. That's interesting.
SA, the military arm of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. This revolution failed when other nationalist politicians refused to help Hitler and the army was called in. Hitler was wounded and arrested shortly afterwards. It was in prison that Hitler dictated his autobiography, Mein Kampf, which became the bedrock of Nazi ideology. All of this would make it seem like the Weimar Republic was about to immediately collapse, but it managed to survive thanks to the intervention of two specific individuals. Gustav Stresemann, who helped to repair relations with France, and Charles Dawes, an American who would later become vice president, who helped to relieve some of Germany's economic problems. Germany's repayments were lowered, the French agreed to leave the Ruhr, and America agreed to loan Germany money.
Yeah, I'm sure that Charles Dawes ended up working quite closely with Hitler. Not as a Nazi, but as sort of like a middleman, like a go-between between him and Hitler and other political parties. I could be wrong. I might be getting mixed up with someone else. But I'm sure Hitler had a little thing for his wife as well. Something like that.
Germany's repayments were lowered, the French agreed to leave the Ruhr, and America agreed to loan Germany money, which created a strong economic link between the two countries. So then the Great Depression struck, tanking the US economy and dragging Germany's down with it. Paul von Hindenburg, the president of Germany at the time, failed to get the Reichstag to agree on a response, or anything. As a result, he had to invoke Article 48, which allowed the president to pass laws without the approval of the Reichstag in times of emergency. The biggest problem with Article 48 was that there was no definition of an emergency, meaning it was open to abuse. The German people turned to different political parties to fix the problems. Some chose communism, whereas others placed their faith in the National Socialists.
I don't know if there's any Star Wars fans here, but this is sort of going like a little Star Wars wave, like when Palpatine, I think in the Phantom Menace he become Chancellor, and in Attack of the Clones more powers were awarded to him in times of emergency, and that kind of split the factions in Coruscant. I don't know how we've managed to tie in Star Wars politics to this, but we're getting somewhere.
The approval of the Reichstag in times of emergency. The biggest problem with Article 48 was that there was no definition of an emergency, meaning it was open to abuse. The German people turned to different political parties to fix the problems. Some chose communism, whereas others placed their faith in the National Socialists. The Nazis believed that the German-speaking peoples should be united in a single state. They argued that communists and the Jews were the enemies of the German people and as such had to be removed. The Nazis were...
Sorry, I'm just going to go back and read these. Unify the German-speaking people, make Germany self-sustaining, eradicate the threat of communism, expand in Germany by seizing neighbouring lands for Germans to expand into, assert superiority of the Aryan people, answer the Jewish question by removing the Jewish people from Germany. Okay, yeah. pretty much covered everything.
The Jews were the enemies of the German people and as such had to be removed. The Nazis were popular because they wished to disregard the Treaty of Versailles, which many Germans considered insulting. They also wished to limit any foreign involvement in German affairs by limiting the rights and numbers of foreigners in Germany. Another reason was people's anger with the continuing economic crises which they were desperate to end. A series of elections led to a massive increase in the number of seats held by the Nazis, and by 1932 they were the largest party by far. After continuously coming first, Hitler asked President Hindenburg to be made Chancellor, which he refused several times because they were worried that Hitler...
Let's not forget they walked out of all the votes that didn't go their way, because you can't pass the results of the election if not all parties are present, so they would just get up and leave when things didn't go their way. So that's a small detail.
First, Hitler asked President Hindenburg to be made Chancellor, which he refused several times because they were worried that Hitler would overthrow the government. Yet eventually, after the Nazis' continuous victories in elections, Hindenburg agreed to give him the job in January 1933. So Hitler immediately began working to overthrow the government. A fire started in the Reichstag by a young Dutch communist was used by Hitler to paint all communists as the enemies of...
Is that... That's not proven. Later sentenced to death. I'm sure that there's a lot of... it's a very contentious issue that I'm not 100% certain that this is a fact. It probably was a fact that they found someone there and he admitted to starting the fire. But it was very, a lot of people think that Hitler sent him and then told him when the police catch him that say he was a communist. There's all sorts of stuff surrounding it, so it's a big thing to brush over.
Germany. Hindenburg, under pressure from Hitler, issued the Reichstag Fire Decree, and the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, which...
Freedom of expression, freedom of press, right to privacy, right to protest. Laws didn't have to abide by the Weimar Constitution. The government did not need the approval of the Reichstag to pass laws.
which suspended
Right.
many civil liberties and made Hitler the de facto dictator of Germany. These were passed mainly because the opposing communist parties were outlawed and that the vote was being held in a building filled with armed members of the SA. Over the next few months, Hitler established the secret police, the Gestapo, in order to help shore up his position. He outlawed trade unions as they were seen as breeding grounds for communists,
Yeah.
and in July he abolished all other political parties. In 1934...
Oh, a fun little fact. One of the first things that Hitler done was, I can't remember what the actual act was called, but it was sort of an edict to make the factories cleaner because, factories were infested with like mice and rats and they were very dirty places at the time, and Hitler was a bit of a germaphobe. So while cleaning the factories, they used a chemical to kill the rats and mice, and it was actually Zyklon B, which was the same poison they used to kill the Jews in the death camps. It wasn't the exact same Zyklon B. Obviously the one that killed the Jews was a lot more powerful, but it kind of correlates into Hitler thinking of the Jews as a disease, and obviously everyone thinks rats are disease, so we kind of drew the line between them two and thought, you know what, we'll kill them the exact same way we kill the rats. Yeah, I heard that a while ago and I always thought it was really interesting, just because it kind of draws that distinction between him thinking of the Jewish people as a disease.
as breeding grounds for communists, and in July he abolished all other political parties. In 1934, Hitler ordered the SS, another paramilitary group, and the Gestapo to eliminate his enemies, which included the head of the SA, Ernst Röhm, in an event known as the Night of the Long Knives. This was mainly because Hitler felt that the SA was the only force that could stop him. Shortly after this purge, President Hindenburg died, and Hitler assumed the role of president as well as that of the Chancellor. He declared himself the Führer of Germany and, using Article 48, create a single-party dictatorship. The lives of Germans changed massively under the new Nazi regime. The media was brought under the control of Joseph Goebbels, the Minister for Propaganda. Heinrich Himmler was placed in command of the Gestapo and the SS, who were ordered to crack down on anyone who disagreed with the Nazi government. Germans, for the most part, accepted having less freedoms in return for a higher standard of living, and because the Nazis had ended the chaos from the decade before they took power.
I'm just thinking, if you put yourselves in the shoes of the German people right now, you can see why at this point there's not that much resistance. The standard of living in Germany at the time was so poor, unbelievably poor, and all they had to do was give us a few rights here and there, and the economy would improve massively. They'd have a military, they'd be able to take pride in their nation. You can see why people at the time didn't put up much of a fight. Obviously, they had no idea of what was to come. And I'm not saying that the Nazis were good in any way. I'm just saying at the time you can see why, people were willing to accept that the loss of a few rights is an acceptable thing.
Term for a higher standard of living, and because the Nazis had ended the chaos from the decade before they took power. The Nazi government established the German Labour Front, which was like a trade union except without the representation. The Nazis also established the Strength Through Joy programme, which was designed to keep workers happy. It even helped to reduce class barriers by making vacations, clubs, cinemas and other recreational activities open to people outside of the upper classes. Its most popular creation was the People's Car, better known as the Volkswagen, which further bridged the class divide since it could be paid for in instalments. In 1936, Hermann Goering was put in charge of the economy, beginning the 4-year plan, which was supposed to make Germany entirely self-sufficient within 4 years. Unemployment virtually disappeared, conscription was instated, and major public works were undertaken, most famously the Autobahn and the Berlin Olympic Games. The most important part of the 4-year plan was that it saw the beginning of German rearmament, which was a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's plan to unify the German people picked up towards the end of the 30s. In 1938, after some double-dealing, threats and a referendum, German troops marched into Austria and Hitler announced its annexation. After negotiations with the British and the French, it was agreed that Germany would annex the ethnically German Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. Germany soon afterwards occupied half of it, which wasn't agreed. The Lithuanians then caved into Hitler's demands for this territory. The British and the French, afraid of a new major war in Europe, did nothing to deter Hitler from seizing more and more territory or rearming, which served only to embolden him. An agreement was then made between Germany and the...
I think I've explained this in a previous World War II video, but just to shed some light as to why Britain was so reluctant to go to war. At the time we was in a state of isolation, and we was pretty happy to just kind of take an inward look, between us and our colonies. And there was the Labour, which are kind of like our Democrat Party, was in control at the time, and they was very anti-war. And the Conservatives were very pro-war going in at the time. So the reason that we kind of set the deal... I can't get my words out, I'm sorry. The reason we said to Hitler that, if you invade Poland, we're going to war, was not only just to reinforce Poland, but it was also so that the party at the time would be able to establish themselves. Like, no one votes out a party during wartime, do you know what I mean? It's not a very done thing. So that they will be able to secure their position for the next 4 years. If you don't believe me, you can just go Google this. It's, Neville Chamberlain was in control at the time, but I think it's JJ Aberystwyth. He had like a mad name like that. He was in control in the late 30s. So that's why there was very, inward looking, you could say. Yeah.
The Soviet Union to divide Poland, and on September the 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded, and 2 weeks later the Soviets would do the same, beginning the Second World War. France and Britain had an agreement with Poland and declared war on Germany, although Germany would quickly overrun France. In 1941, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union shortly before declaring war on the United States. Two very bad ideas.
Yeah.
The Germans were initially very successful, and by 1943, the Third Reich looked like this. The Allies, particularly the British and the United States, began bombing campaigns against German cities, most notably Cologne, Hamburg, and of course, Dresden. These attacks were designed to destroy German factories and infrastructure, as well as frighten the Germans into submission. The German economy didn't change drastically at the beginning of the war, since Germany had already been producing arms for many years. One major difference between Germany and the Allies was that Germany was very reluctant to have women working in the factories, which ultimately lowered the number of available workers and frontline soldiers. In the conquered territories,
yes, but they also had a massive slave labour force. Of course they would have had more workers if they employed women as well, but let's not forget they had a massive slave labour force.
Nazis implemented a policy of forced labour. In Poland, many women were forced to work farmlands to produce food, whilst men worked in factories. Many Jewish people, alongside anyone else considered undesirable, were used for slave labour to produce weapons, some of which they sabotaged. Throughout Europe, the Jewish populations were rounded up and placed into concentration camps. The original purpose of these camps was not extermination but forced labour, although they all had horrendous mortality rates. Before and throughout the war, the Nazis had attempted to decide on what they would do with the Jewish population of Europe. At first,
This is very important here. A lot of people always wonder why nothing was done about the treatment of the Jewish people early on, in like the 30s in Germany. And the simple answer is because everywhere in Europe was quite anti-Semitic. During Kristallnacht, that's when Germany kind of took it that extra step. Obviously, it was brutal, but generally, everyone treated the Jews bad, and that's just why it never really got the attention it deserved. Plus, world media wasn't what it was back then. That's the first. Yeah, I guess.
Throughout the war, the Nazis had attempted to decide on what they would do with the Jewish population of Europe. At first, the Nazis wished to deport them, and in fact some were sent to Palestine. It wasn't until 1942 that the camps began to explicitly exterminate prisoners, or that specialised extermination camps were opened. The best known camps being Auschwitz and Treblinka, where over 1.5 million people were killed between them. Throughout the Holocaust, it is believed that roughly 5.5 million Jews were killed, alongside roughly the same amount of Poles and Soviet prisoners. Gypsies, those with mental Jews were killed alongside...
That's an incredible picture, isn't it? And take it, this guy's a Soviet soldier. Look at all these here. And yeah, fucking Heinrich Himmler walked past you. Oh, what a photo that is. I don't think I've ever seen this photo before. Look at the smiles. Well, smile, like proud. It's weird, isn't it? I know these are POW, so it's not exactly like, so you're looking into a Jewish death camp. But, the mortality rates for these were just astounding. So, you may as well be looking into a death camp. You think of the people that were captured. Alexander Solzhenitsyn is a big one, who went back to Russia, got put in the Gulag, went on to write the Gulag Archipelago. Amazing.
Roughly the same amount of Poles and Soviet prisoners. Gypsies, those with mental and physical disabilities, as well as homosexuals, were also exterminated alongside them. Having failed to conquer the Soviet Union...
Here's a question maybe someone can answer for me. How the hell do you identify... There's so much room for jokes here. How do you identify a homosexual? Do you know what I mean? Surely he would have just lied. unless you didn't want to deny that he was a homosexual. But that was always a weird one for me. There's so many jokes that we're just going to carry on.
Those homosexuals were also exterminated alongside them. Having failed to conquer the Soviet Union, the tide of the war changed against the Nazis, and the Soviets managed to force them all the way back into Germany, liberating many of the concentration camps on the way. At the same time, the United States, United Kingdom and Canada, amongst others, invaded Western Europe, and together they managed to push the Nazis back into Germany as well. Most of the German High Command, including Hitler, committed suicide in April 1945, and Germany surrendered in May, thus ending the Third Reich and the Nazi regime. Germany was occupied, and the surviving Nazi leaders were put on trial at Nuremberg, where many were sentenced to death. After its surrender, Germany and Berlin were split into occupied zones, and both began the process of denazification. The Allied occupation zones were soon combined into the Federal Republic of Germany, and the Soviet occupied zones became the German Democratic Republic.
What's this here? What is that? Is it Liechtenstein? Yeah, it's Liechtenstein, isn't it? I'm pretty confident.
Known as West and East Germany, respectively. They would remain divided until 1990 at the end of the Cold War. Ultimately, the legacy of Nazi Germany is complex. The Nazis, whilst committing
that was Berlin, wasn't it? Sorry. Is that Berlin? Because it was split up, like that would have been the UK, that would have been the US, and this would have been Russia. Yeah. Final answer.
Known as West and East Germany, respectively. They would remain divided until 1990 at the end of the Cold War. Ultimately, the legacy of Nazi Germany is complex. The Nazis, whilst committing unimaginable crimes, managed to reinvigorate Germany and build it into a military powerhouse. The Nazis brought about immense suffering across the European continent, and their actions reduced many countries, including Germany itself, to ruins. The consequences of Nazism are still being examined because, frankly, it's still too soon to know exactly what they are. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you.
Yeah, it's weird at the end. There's this is just going to be my review, but it was a great video. Very well written, very well animated, and I'll just do a quick 2-minute review. Yeah, I keep seeing this thing, and it's like going to become the popular thing to say, where it's like the fight against modern day Nazism, and just the rise of fascism in like capitalist countries like America and the UK, and I am confused when I see it because. The general belief is that anyone right of the centre now, slightly past conservative, automatically becomes a Nazi. I'm not saying that the left portray this thought. I'm just saying, like, the more extreme people on the left, the people that even the liberals don't like, I'm trying to say. It's just made me think of it because I was watching TikTok earlier, and it was this guy, and he was talking to his history professor, and he was like, "Have you ever punched a Nazi?" And I was like, "Well, what is a Nazi nowadays?" I just want to get your opinion on it. Is modern day fascism a thing? Or modern day Nazism a thing? No, I'm not talking about the Proud Boys and, the KKK and all them. Like, we know where they fit on the spectrum. I'm talking about just your general average everyday Joe. Are some of the beliefs that people on the right side of the spectrum have fascist? And probably consider themselves to be just conservative. It's just something that I thought I could get your opinion on while we're here. Not really the safest topic to bring up, but there we are. Yeah, man, like, comment, subscribe. Always down to do history videos, especially World War II. Yeah, so the like, comments, the subscribes, they honestly mean the most, man. Channel's struggling lately, but it is what it is. I enjoy doing YouTube, so it doesn't really matter too much. But yeah, peace out, guys. Take it easy. It was a pleasure seeing you.